Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. As mentioned, our special guest, Les Landis, performance improvement expert and author of the new book, Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. Les, welcome to the program. Pleasure to have you with us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Rick.
So much to talk about in the book, and remember those two words, imagination and free will. We'll get to that in just a second. I want to talk about where we are in the workplace now, and you talk about something that's interesting, saying basically 50 is the new 40, and we're thinking you're talking about age, and you're actually talking about basically you're required to do 50 hours for 40 hours of pay, do more with less. Talk about that, because you also explain we're close to maybe a mutiny in the workplace because people are tired of hearing that.
Well, I like to use those little quips because they kind of get people's attention. But the fact of the matter is during the past few years, as we've had this economic downturn, a lot of employers have been saying, we got to work harder, we got to work faster, you got to do more with less. And, that'll go so far. But after a while, employees start saying, well, you know what? I think it's time to take another look at this. And as the economy starts to recover, you're going to see more and more employees who are saying, you know what? I don't think I like this deal. 50 hours for 40 hours of pay isn't something that I want to continue to do all of my life. And frankly, there are going to be more and more opportunities that are going to pop up for people to be able to look at some of those alternatives.
The concept of the book, and again, the name is Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, the Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace, is employee engagement. Before we start talking about it, define that for us. What are we talking about specifically with employee engagement?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are a lot of different answers to that question. The one that we use is kind of a spin-off from something that was created by the Conference Board a few years ago, and it's an emotional connection that employees feel for their organizations that, the way we say it, gets them tuned in, turned on, and eager to go the extra mile for their work. That's pretty much the basic definition that we're using.
Well, and I read a statistic, Gallup poll, 30% of people are actively engaged in the workplace, 20% are actively disengaged. That leaves half of us in the middle, and the cost, I think you put on it, of like $300 billion a year. I guess the conventional thinking up to this point is, if I dangle a little money, if I dangle some route to get some promotion, that's what I need to do to motivate the employees, and everything's going to be fine. And you're saying there's a lot more to the equation than money and possible promotion.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's some very interesting research that was done by a colleague of ours by the name of Ken Kopak at George Mason University. He's no longer alive, but when he did his research, and he did it a couple of different times, he asked thousands, tens of thousands of employees across the country, what is it that gets you to go that extra mile, that tuned in, turned on, extra effort kind of feeling for your organization? And they asked their managers a different question. They said, if we were to ask your employees, what are the things that get them to go the extra mile, what would they say? Now, you think those responses were the same, Rick?
I would doubt it.
I would doubt it. And so here's actually what employees said. The top three, all right, this is extra effort. And that is interesting work, appreciation of work done, and being in on information and decisions. Okay? Now, what do you think managers said?
Oh, I'm sure they went with the conventional wisdom that we talked about before.
Absolutely. The first thing they said was money.
Yeah.
The second thing they said was job security, and the third thing they said was chance to advance. Now look at those two things. The things that employees say are the things that get us to go the extra mile, cost the company nothing. And the stuff that managers said employees would say cost the company a lot. Now, good wages, job security, chance to advance, they are not unimportant. Those things are what Fred Hertzberg used to call the hygiene factors in order to really get people to feel okay about their work. But the extra mile, the extra effort, those are the things that have nothing to do with money. It's about interesting work. It's about being involved in decisions. It's about knowing what's going on. It's about being appreciated and recognized for doing a good job. Those are the things that get people to go the extra mile.
The book is Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, the Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. It's written as a business fable, so it's a story. Tom and David. Tom is an HR and employee communication manager. David Kay is a consultant who's brought in. So it's fascinating. In fact, once you pick it up, you're going to finish the story. It's very easy to read. It's not a business textbook where you're going to sit there and you're going to have to take notes. And it makes so much sense. And you, as you're going through, you're really, in fact, you talk about it when you summarize at the end, steps for getting the best from people in the workplace. And one that you talk about is provide meaningful rationale and explanation of benefits. And you just touched on that. How important is that for us to properly communicate with the employee exactly what it is we're asking you to do and what value that has to you and everybody in the business?
Well, yeah, actually, I'm going to kind of step back a little bit, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I have a thing that says that everything that people, all of the activity in the workplace falls into one of three categories: play, work, or hell. Okay?
Yes.
And when you look at the stuff that we call play, that's the stuff that all of us love to do. Okay, we just will. In fact, if we didn't need the money, we'd probably do it for free.
We'd volunteer to do this. Yes,
that's right. We'd volunteer to do that. Then there's stuff that's the work stuff. You know what? That's the regular everyday stuff. We're willing to do it. It's part of the contract. No problem. And then there's hell, the stuff that nobody wants to do. And so what I tell folks is, first of all, make as much work as you can play. And that's where it goes to this expectation thing that you want. You have to find out from every individual what it is that gets them turned on, what it is that gets them juiced, what their expectations are, that you can create common expectations around the things that people really love to do. Because if people love to do it, they're going to do it well, they're going to do it willingly. With work, all you got to do is, as I said before, you have to just attend to the hygiene factors, make it a decent place to work, fair wages, good basic treatment, the kinds of things you would expect. Now, when it comes to hell, first thing you got to do is ask yourself the obvious question: do we really need to do this here, or is this some kind of legacy left over from 3 decades ago? And if it turns out that you do have to do it, then you say, all right, is there a different way we can do it to make it less hellish? And if the answer to that is no, then you play this game that I call Let's Make a Deal. And I say, look, I know this is crappy work, but let's make a deal. If you're willing to do that, what do you need from us in return? And it's usually not money. Because money, you can't pay people enough money to do things that are crappy.
Exactly.
And so the problem is, then of course, what happens is I say, well, and if you don't want to try those, you can always resort to the old command and control approach, which is you're going to do it, or quote unquote, there's hell to be paid. And you go ahead and try that for a while and just see what kind of performance you get. You're going to wind up with unhappy employees and ultimately unhappy customers.
Les Landis, our guest on the program, performance improvement expert. Les is available, by the way, consults a number of companies, large and small, around the country. Information at his website, Landis, Landes, associates.com. Of course, you can log on to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link up with Les. His book is Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. And again, landesassociates.com is the website. In the book, in the dedication, and you dedicate the book to David Berlow, and you said, shared profound wisdom with elegant simplicity. And that caught my attention because I really believe sometimes we have a tendency to overcomplicate. Is simplicity, clarity, are those words that should be used more in a business sense?
Well, I think you ought to use them all the time.
Yes.
Let's just make sure that we're not trying to get too highfalutin and come up with fun things. I mean, actually, the play, work, and hell thing, I got that from David Berlow. Those are the kinds of little things that help us understand what can sometimes become a little bit of a complex concepts. So, yeah, I believe in that wholeheartedly. And that's actually kind of at the core of the principle that is behind the subtitle of the book, The Power and Imagination of Free Will. The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. And so I've been thinking a long time, what are the things that really are the big why behind people's performance in the workplace? And I talk a little bit about that in what I discussed with Ken Kovac's work, but I wanted to get a little deeper. And so I started looking at this whole issue of the things, what really makes human beings different from other living creatures on the planet? And of course, one of the first things people start thinking when you ask that question is, well, we're intelligent, right? And animals aren't so much. Well, I can argue with that, and I think a lot of people would argue that animals perhaps in some ways have more intelligence than human beings. But anyway, then the other thing, of course, I always love is when people say, well, people have souls, right? And animals don't have souls, and they don't go to heaven and so on. And I said, well, you know what? Walt Disney is a pretty powerful guy, and he said all dogs go to heaven, so I believe him. And so I said, for me, it really does come down to these two things, imagination and free will. And let me just play a little game with you, Rick. Answer or finish this statement for me. Free as a
bird.
Bird. Everybody gets that right. So, question for you. What are birds really free to do?
They can fly and do whatever they want, whenever they want.
Okay. So, are they free to do that, or are they programmed to do that?
Well, that's interesting.
So, and one way you can tell the difference is if people are free to do things, they tend to do them in different ways, and it shows up in different ways. Different houses do it, different pastimes,
Right.
so on and so forth. But if you look at one robin and you compare it to another robin, they pretty much get up at the same time in the morning. They eat the same kind of worms, they build the same kind of nests, and they lay the same kinds of eggs, and they get the same kinds of baby birds. So very little distinction. So this whole business of free will is quite different. We are the only creatures who can operate outside of the natural program, because we have programs too. But we are the only creatures that can say, I'm going to ignore that program and I'm going to do my own thing. All right? Now, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But then the second thing that's quite different is imagination, because human beings are the only creatures, so far as I can tell, that are capable of imagining things that do not exist in the natural world. So you take the combination of this imagination, this capacity to conceive of things that don't even exist, plus the free will, plus the intelligence and the other things that we have. And that's what allows us to create all these remarkable things like computers and Skype, the thing that we're using here today to communicate.
Right.
It's because of our capacity, first of all, to choose outside of our program, and secondly, to imagine things that don't even exist.
Let's take that a step further. By the way, Les Landis, our guest in the program, performance improvement expert, his book, Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. LandisAssociates.com, the website. Information at our site, thisweekinamerica.us. Let's take it into the workplace now. Give me several examples of companies that understand the power of imagination and free will and use that to get the best out of their employees, consequently benefiting everybody.
Yeah. So first of all, two key points before I give you the examples. First of all, we know imagination and free will by themselves are not going to run a great organization, because people have done bad things in the name of imagination and free will for a very long time. So we also have to have these balancing factors that I say make up the human rocket. The thrusters, the boosters of the imagination and free will. The stabilizers of the rocket to keep it from wobbling all over is security and self-esteem. And the guidance system is what I call the responsibility and accountability. You have to have all of those things to create the foundation for trust in an organization. And when you've got that, you can accomplish almost anything. Now, taking it into the workplace, there are so many companies that have done extraordinarily well. Springfield Remanufacturing Company, they've created this thing called open book management. We use that model in a lot of the work we do with organizations, and it's basically a way for people to get in on the information about what's really going on in the organization. And then they also have the opportunity to say, okay, well, given that, now that I understand what's going on in the business, let's talk about some things. Let's use that imagination that we have to figure out how we're going to make improvements. But that requires a tremendous amount of trust. This word trust, Rick, is so fundamental to this whole thing that you can't even think about accomplishing the kinds of things that we want to do without it. Southwest Airlines, still the only airlines in the air. Well, I think maybe JetBlue and a couple of these others are doing well, but not many airlines are making a profit. And one of the reasons is because organizations like Southwest, you know what their whole driver is? It's called love and compassion. And in fact, their sign on the stock exchange is LUV. One of the things they've got is nearly a 100-person culture committee that's constantly looking at how to do things in a way that puts the employee at the center of their business. There's Zappos, who has a completely different model for the way that they handle calls and orders on with the shoes and everything else that they're ordering these days. There is usually in most organizations call centers like that. People are expected to do a rapid turnover,
Yes.
and that's how they get rated. Now with Zappos, their first driver, their first value is customer service. And I talked with them about this at one time, and they said, well, the longest call we've had is 5.5 hours, because the goal was to make sure that that customer is completely satisfied. So those are a few examples, and there are many others, but frankly, not nearly as many as there should be, because this stuff is so elemental, it's so basic, and we've developed systems and processes to help people walk through it, because that's really the challenge. You know, in our gut, in our hearts, we understand this stuff, but we don't have the systems, tools, and the processes like we do in areas of measurement, in communication, rewards and recognition, continuous improvement, learning and development. All of those things require the right kinds of what we call people first systems, policies, and processes if you want to optimize this extraordinary gift of imagination and free will.
Les Landis, our guest on This Week in America, performance improvement expert. Again, Les consults a number of companies around the country. If you're interested in contacting him, his website is Landis, Landes, Associates.com. His book is Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. It's a business fable, very easy to read. Of course, all that information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. A couple minutes left in the program. You talk about something that's interesting, that so many people say, not my job. And you talk about job descriptions, and there's some people that say everything has to be, you got to fine tune that job description. We need to let people know exactly what we expect. And you're saying, boy, that's really putting restrictions on people,
Yeah.
not necessarily a good thing.
Well, yeah. In fact, the way I say it is, you know, the good thing about a job description is it'll let you know exactly what you're supposed to do. The bad thing about a job description is that it lets you know exactly what you're supposed to do. And so you can see right there the inherent conflict. If all you're going to be defined by, if all you're going to look at the opportunities from is on the basis of the job description, what's the opportunity for using your imagination and your free will to make choices that allow you to stretch, to take some risks, to go beyond the boundaries that have constrained us? And yes, it does provide some guidance for us, and that's important, but you've got to have this combination of some foundation along with the opportunity to move beyond those boundaries.
At the end of the book, you've got core concepts, got about a minute left in the program, and I found interesting realities about people in the workplace. Number one is people make mistakes. Do we often forget that? And do we need to give people the room to make mistakes? I mean, everybody has made a mistake. The Etzel wasn't designed by somebody in the assembly line. That was somebody making a lot of money that made a major mistake.
Yeah.
The importance of understanding mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, if people don't have a safe place to work, then why in the world would they ever take a chance of coming up with a new radical idea to get them in trouble? In fact, Tom Watson, who was the founder of IBM, had a great phrase when somebody asked him, how can we ever achieve the level of innovation that you guys have achieved in IBM? And his answer was, increase your failure rate. Now think about that. What kind of a culture do you have to allow people to increase their failure rate? It certainly isn't command and control. It's all about freedom. It's all about free will and imagination, and understanding that any time that we do anything to undermine that special gift, that special capacity, we're undermining what it means to be human.
Do you find, and last question, I keep pushing the boundary here, but this is interesting, the last question, do you find as you're working with companies, they all sort of want a one-size-fits-all approach? I know you've talked about make it unique to what it is you're doing. There's no simple answer, is there? You have to really understand the culture of your organization to be able to do this effectively.
That's a great point, and it actually goes to one of the reasons why I decided to write this book and tell folks, because one of the problems that we've had is that we've had some great successes using these kinds of models, and people have created what they call best practices, and so organizations go rushing off to copycat all of the other companies' best practices. But I'm telling you, that just doesn't work. Sometimes you can get some ideas from other organizations that might help, but you really have to start by organically understanding your own culture, which is why we want them to look at the deeper why. We also want them to look at some fundamental values and principles. We want them to understand themselves. We want them to understand human beings in the context of their own organization, as opposed to looking at what other people are doing.
I love the book, Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, The Power and Purpose of Imagination and Free Will in the Workplace. Les Landis has been our guest on the program, performance improvement consultant and expert. He's available at landisassociates.com. Books available, you can order that at landisassociates.com as well as amazon.com. Les, pleasure to have you in the program. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great fun.
Our pleasure. We will have Les back in the program. And again, all the information on Les available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.